neuroscience and the way that neuroscience adds value really to leadership and coaching happens on three different levels. On the very, very first level, it's really an identification or a better understanding of what is happening around us. You know, we have intuitive ideas about what's really happening in the world. And we may use many, many tools to understand, coaching tools, leadership tools, that enable us to get in a better connection with people. But when we start to look and understand the science that lies behind some of these tools or some of these intuitions we've had, it's interesting to see that science doesn't actually, in this case, doesn't detract, it only adds value. So on the very, very first level, the neuroscience of leadership and coaching allows us just to understand our environment, to have a better understanding, a better sensibility, I'd say, about what's going on. On another level, on a second level, it starts to allow us to understand how we can add more value to the world, to those who are around us. On the third level, or perhaps on the most fundamental level, and I like to call it on the first level, level one, the base level, it allows us to understand ourselves. And, you know, I think in this Masters, one of the things I appreciate most about the IDC Masters is that it's not just learning about being a coach or being a leader. It's also a personal journey, learning about who we are. And neuroscience can bring a whole new perspective and whole new position of observation about what is going on within us as we start to experience these other two dimensions. Yeah. And so as we start to connect these three dimensions together, what we're going to be doing in the neuroscience module of the Master's program is looking at how these three dimensions interconnect with one another. You know, Ellen, I tell you a little anecdotal story. I'm doing a lot of work, as you know, right now in Iraq and helping Iraqis who have been traumatized through 45 years of war to start to think about how they might change their dynamic and how they might change their environment to get a better future for themselves. And some of these people, it's very difficult for them to think about how to move forward without some assurances, I would say, some scientific assurances to allow them to step forward into a world that is very unknown. Thinking about how we interconnect with one another, thinking about how we add value to one another. It's a risk. We take a risk with one another. We create relationships. And the neuroscience, what I'm finding in Iraq is really allowing this connectivity between the Americans who are working there and the Iraqis to find a new dynamic, to be able to take the risk of creating friendships where perhaps friendships could never have been imagined before, because they understand on a scientific level, if they can overcome blockages, they can create a future that is so much more positive for themselves. To be a true master coach, to master your profession as a coach, of course you need to understand, you know, what's happening on an emotional level. You need to understand what blockages are coming up for people. You need to understand ways and subtle ways that we can perhaps use tools like NLP to move us forward. But it is also fundamentally important that we understand what is actually happening in the brain, what is actually happening on a neurological level. And this is going to allow coaches to start to think about tools they've got, but dialogues and wording that they might want to use differently when they start to think about the connectivity and the interconnectivity of the brain. Yeah. It's one of the last things that we'll really look at in this module on neuroscience is also how do we keep out of the way? How do we partner with our coachee's brain? Not push our coachee's brain, not show them the way forward, not help them, but how can we be at the service of the brain and enable that thought process to move forward in a natural and holistic way, not to force anything.